When you fall from a height, any height, there's a risk.
There is the risk of dying if you fall off a chair.
A small risk may be, but from just 4 metres or more, chances are it will be fatal.
If someone's fallen from a first floor window, we'd sort of expect most people to survive that. When you get to somebody who's fallen from a second floor window, that's much more worrying. And the patients I've known who've fallen from the top of a building have almost always been fatal.
And crashing to the ground, it's brain damage or multiple injuries from the collision that kills. In everyday life, the body is brilliantly designed to cope with impact.
We take thousands of steps every day and we run, and we're walking up and down stairs. The body's very good at absorbing these everyday shocks. We're relatively heavy, we're walking on 2 feet rather than 4 feet. We're taking this everyday shock all the time, up to a certain point.
Step over that threshold and things start to go wrong.
You can crash a car into a wall and measure the kind of force it takes to break them. You know, we don't generally do that with the body, so we don't actually know the real limits of the body, which is why I think someone falling hundreds of feet should be dead.
Should be dead. These 3 people are members of an elite club. They're walking miracles. They've each fallen over 1,000 feet and survived. So how did they do it? In 2001, Lindy Harding fell from the incredible height of 4,000 feet and survived. At the age of 21, Lindy was fulfilling the dream of a lifetime, learning to skydive in California. She'd already been parachuting several times, but never before had she risked the ultimate thrill, free fall. And from the very first moment, she was hooked.
The first few seconds of free fall were just immense, and that 5 seconds was the most memorable 5 seconds I will ever have, I reckon. I wish I could describe it better. If anyone's curious, you'll just have to try it. I can't. Look at my face.
So her second free fall was something Lindy was looking forward to.
I remember getting into the plane.
But that's about all she remembers, except she was the first to jump.
I'm told that I did a very good exit, which I'm very pleased about, particularly as it was a bigger plane and a completely different exit to the one I'd done before.
Moments later, something was to go drastically wrong. No other parachutists witnessed her fall, so what exactly happened is a complete mystery.
What we know for certain is that Lynn hit the ground at a very high speed.
She should have been dead.
Half of me thought she was going to die, and the other half had an unshakable belief that she would survive.
The fact that Lindy did survive seems nothing short of a miracle. Even the trauma experts are baffled.
It's very difficult to see how she could have survived when she's fallen that distance. There must have been factors that have helped save her life, and whether it was some sort of resistance or whether something broke her fall or how she fell, nobody's going to ever know. I mean, all you can say is that this seems a magical event that's happened.
It's a pretty simple equation. A human body falling 4,000 feet equals death. This impact test track shows why. Lindy's not going to volunteer this time, so instead, here's Olaf. He's a real dummy. Speed him along the track at 30 miles an hour. For just 40 feet, and with the amount of energy Olaf's gathered, he just keeps on traveling. And Lindy fell 4,000 feet, not 40. Falling that far, she would have been traveling at 120 miles an hour, gathering 17 times as much energy as Olaf. At that speed, she'd have hit the deck with a force more than 50 times her own body weight. So why wasn't she smashed to pulp? Lindy can't explain the miracle, and for good reason.
I don't remember anything of the incident itself. It's like that part of my memory doesn't exist.
If you sustain a head injury, you will stun the brain, for a better way of putting it. And the degree of brain injury is shown by how much memory you lose before the accident, and that's called pre-traumatic amnesia. And then how much memory you lose after the accident, which is post-traumatic amnesia. Now, you will recover some of that memory later, but often people don't recover all of it.
And although Lindy's made a full recovery, that part of her memory is still missing. She wants to try to piece together the puzzle and find out just how it was possible to fall 4,000 feet and survive. In 2001, Lindy Harding fell 4,000 feet when her parachute failed. She survived, but she has no idea how. Maybe there's a clue in another parachutist's survival story. In 1996, paratrooper Alan Craven suffered a major parachute malfunction. He fell 1,000 feet. His leg was broken so badly it had to be amputated. But it turns out it was the severity of his injuries that saved his life. The accident happened when he went to North Carolina on a military operation, Exercise Purple Star.
It was one of the biggest parachute drops since Arnhem in the Second World War.
On the day, all the paratroopers were looking forward to the jump.
It was a massive adrenaline rush. Everybody was really excited. You're nervous, but excited.
The exercise was a huge success, but for Alan Craven, Exercise Purple Star would change his life forever.
It was a nice night, it was clear. The general attitude, it was good. It was dark once we started to jump, but you could still see the clear blue sky as such. And as we were ready to jump, that was it. We were out of the door and gone. Once I was out of the plane, you check your canopy, good canopy, excellent all-round observation. You look all around, up, down, make sure no one's below you.
Alan's next job was to lower his container.
You have a container fastened onto you, which is basically your backpack, and you want to lower that on a 15-foot of cordage so you don't land with it.
But on Alan's parachute harness were two clamps that fastened his parachute to him.
On lowering my container with the jolt, it was fastened on the left-hand side. It popped one of the clamps on your chest called a cable tie, and it popped one of them open, which shot up into the air, and basically the parachute Roman candled or totally closed up. And instantly, once something like that happens, you know you've got to get your reserve out. It's a major malfunction.
As Alan's chute spiralled into the air, he was fast approaching a speed of 100 miles an hour and would have literally seconds to deploy his reserve parachute.
We were using American kit, and the only difference is with the American kit, it doesn't have a compressed kicker spring inside the reserve. With the American one, you have to put your hand over it, pop it, hand down the back, pull it out, over your shoulder, chuck it out and flap it as you're falling. I did that the first time. It was just like a bag of washing above me. So I pulled it all back in, over the shoulder again, chucked it out again, and with that split tenth of a second, a big black shadow.
I just saw a bloke coming out of the sky at a very quick rate of knots and just hit the ground.
Sergeant Horton feared the worst.
I thought he was dead, to be honest, at the speed he came in.
The next thing I remember was getting slid into a Black Hawk helicopter, and I must have had lots of morphine in me and that, and things going through my head, and I just remember thinking, well, heck, this is excellent. It's like one of them Tour of Duty films. And then the next time I woke up was in hospital with doctors twisting me, banging me, everything else. I was in so much pain, and I remember saying, God, God, get him off me, get him off me.
The injuries to Alan's leg and pelvis were enormous.
The pelvis, as it is fixed like that, snapped at the front and through the side, and it shot up a centimetre. Due to the injuries in the leg and that, I had to have a leg amputated.
His pelvis healed, but his leg was shattered beyond repair. But his injuries were also the main reason Alan survived. The bones in Alan's foot, leg and pelvis shattered like glass. By breaking so badly, he had managed to get rid of the energy from his 1,000-foot plunge and protect his vital organs. And that's the reason he survived. So could this be the secret of Lindy's survival too? Her X-rays should hold the answer.
There we are. Look at this bit, how pointy that area is. And on the left side, it's completely different.
That one.
But Lindy and her father can't really make much sense of her X-rays. So they've sent them to someone who can.
Right, here we have the pelvis. This is a standard view of the pelvis, but slightly twisted. Maybe she was in a lot of pain from her left-hand side, so she's sort of slightly edged round. But it's certainly a good enough view to see that she's not got a fracture of her pelvis.
Her X-rays show cracked ribs and a broken nose, but nothing like Alan's hundreds of fractures. Nothing like enough damage to have absorbed a 120-mile-an-hour impact. Fractures can't explain Lindy's survival. But looking more closely at the X-rays, Dr. Rosemary Morton has a theory.
Well, here we have a chest X-ray. Now, looking at this X-ray and thinking about the mechanism about how she fell, with fractures at the side here, I wonder if she fell curled up with her elbows inside. The chest seems to have been the major injury, and therefore it's most likely that this was the bit that hit the ground first.
It looks like Lindy didn't land feet first, but on her chest. Yet this discovery only deepens the mystery of why she survived.
When people fall, the commonest injury that is fatal is a head injury. Clearly the head's very delicate and very heavy and often falls first. The next most important thing is probably a chest injury. Big blood vessels and the heart and the chest, they're very vulnerable.
The rib cage covers fragile internal organs, and it's damage to these in a fall that kills. But Phil Harding has another thought.
The only thing I can think of is that she may have collapsed like a spring, and that could have helped.
And it's not as mad as it seems. Dr. Peter Zoupos is a top bone specialist.
Now, the skeleton provides the inner frame of the body, a scaffold, on which most of the muscles, the vital organs, hang.
And the rib cage is designed to move. The reason it can do this is the skeleton isn't made from just one material. Dr. Peter Zoupos has a test to show this, but not being able to experiment on Lindy's bones for a scientist, this is the next best thing: a pig. The lab test will show how different parts of the skeleton behave under pressure. The skeleton is cut into small pieces. A saline solution kept at a temperature of 37 degrees, the same as a body. Put them under pressure and we see how and if they break. First, cartilage. Put some pressure on it and the cartilage bends. Release it and it virtually springs back to its original position.
It's completely elastic. The deformation is completely reversible. There's no damage whatsoever. It's a natural rubber. of a sort.
Next, bone from the leg. Compact bone. It only bends slightly, but then it's gone, snapped completely.
So this was a failure of a compact bone. It's a fast and catastrophic event, and all the energy that's stored elastically into the material, it goes to create the fracture surfaces, and also it comes back as an elastic spring. One of the pieces of the bone ended in the bath, and the other one quite outside the bath. The fracture is a clean, complete break of the two, and it's a catastrophic event, very fast.
And now some of the bone from the rib cage. It bends again, quite a lot, and then fractures. But release the pressure, and amazingly, the piece of bone springs back.
It is still intact. There's a very thin film of compact bone on one side. It's half of a sandwich structure. So you have the spongy bone here, which is a cellular solid, and a very thin film of compact bone on this side. So as it flexes, the sponge collapses, but the material stays still in one piece.
So the rib cage is made up of a sponge-like cellular material that collapses and can then recover, unlike the compact leg bone which simply snaps. Lindy's rib cage would have acted like a spring as her dad thought.
For instance, if you consider side impact on the rib cage, some of the energy of impact will go into deforming the rib cage, some will go into moving the ribs with respect to each other and along these hinges here, the elastic material, and the rest of the energy, the excess energy, will go into fracturing the ribs.
Lindy's rib cage acted like a giant shock absorber, protecting her heart.
It is just possible, but the rib cage will just sustain this load and spread it out and distribute in a more rational manner.
But at 120 miles an hour?
It will damage the vital organs nearby.
The fact that she landed on her chest may have helped Lindy, but in itself it could not have been enough to get rid of all the energy of the fall. The X-rays reveal the damage done to her body, but they're also a clue to what happened at the moment of impact, a clue to how she hit the ground, and how someone hits the ground is crucial, as every paratrooper knows. At RAF Bryce Norton near Oxford is Britain's #1 parachute training school.
Anybody that's got ideas, ambitions, dreams of becoming part of the parachute fraternity, this is where they actually come to do their parachute training.
They're taught that when they do a parachute jump, they need to get the landing right, or they might just end up breaking bones. Not much use if you've got a job to do.
And on the course, should have landed on there, 20 feet off for a side right landing.
When we actually approach the ground, we're falling at something like 15 feet per second. When we actually make contact with the ground, we have to try and lose that speed. And the only place that we can actually lose it is through our body.
A front right landing.
Relaxing into the fall, crumpling down and rolling onto their backs, these paratroopers are performing what's known as a parachute landing fall.
If you just come to a sudden halt, then your body takes a full impact. So what we try and do is we try and say to the guys, right, this is where we need to lose the forward movement, and this is how we do it. It's the only way that we can actually lose our speed the safest way possible. So the guys are then able to then get up and then go on to do their duty, because if you think parachuting, it's only a form of transport to get to their place of work.
Stand by, here we go, get your chin on your chest. Keep yourself nice and tight then. Stand by, go!
With professional paratroopers, nothing can be left to chance. To make sure they always land in the safest way, they get drilled, and it's a bit like brainwashing.
Go!
So how effective really is the parachute landing fall?
And roll out, good man.
Big Bazza Buck has been teaching rookie paratroopers the parachute landing fall for 10 years. Today, he's going to learn scientifically whether it can really help to save your life. Dropping from 2.5 meters, he's got to land on these very sophisticated scales known as a force plate, and he's got to do 2 different types of landings. From this, physiologist Steve Myers can measure the difference between the 2 landings. Barry hangs from the ceiling and then drops vertically onto the force plate. And it hurts.
Barry's dropping vertically from around about 2 metres off the ground, and you can see the sort of quite exaggerated movements he makes to absorb just that small amount of shock. He weighs around 90 kilos, and he's not actually going that fast.
Even at this height, the muscles are having to absorb a huge amount of shock. Up the ladder again, but this time Barry uses his training and does a parachute landing fall.
This time he's trying to absorb the shock over a larger area of his body. So the feet land there, he's coming down, he's bending his knee again, but what he's doing then, rather than crouching right down, he's actually falling to one side. So he's trying to get a fluid movement to try and absorb the shock over the fleshy parts of his body.
For Barry, a much softer landing. So how do the 2 landings measure up?
What we have here, we have the red trace, it's the vertical drop, and the blue trace is the parachute landing fall.
And the force plate measures Barry's weight as he hits the floor.
The vertical drop, you're looking around about 13 and a half times his body weight on landing. Barry weighs around about 90 kilograms. It's around 13 times his body weight, so it gives you about over a metric ton of force going through his body.
So that's a lot of weight for the body to take at only 2.5 meters. With the parachute landing fall, what's the difference?
The parachute landing fall, same height he dropped, but he did this roll, and you're looking at around about 9.2 times body weight, which gives you around about half the peak force. Also, you'll see as well, the force comes on much slower and dissipates over a better curve, and that's because he's rolling and trying to spread the load over his body. So the rate of deceleration, when he stops suddenly, there's a big bang. If you can stop and roll into it, it spreads the force.
With the parachute landing fall, Barry hits the ground with almost half the amount of force. So with a bigger height and a bigger impact, it could make all the difference. So is this the secret of Lindy's amazing escape? That she managed to spread the force of impact over the whole of her body? Paratroopers are constantly drilled in the parachute landing fall. It makes for a safer landing by spreading the force of impact over the whole body. So when Lindy fell, did she somehow manage to spread the force with a roll?
Looking down the line, Dave. Keep your chin on your chest.
Looking back at the X-rays, Dr. Rosemary Morton may have the answer.
She may have fallen, curled up into a ball, so her elbows would have been in her side. The head injury, although she had a head injury, doesn't seem to have been that major. So if she'd fallen onto her chest and then her head fallen forwards, this would have caused the concussion that she had. And sort of like the second injury was her head injury rather than the first injury.
By falling onto a springy part of the body, her chest, and then rolling onto her head, she would have spread the force over the different parts of her body. Paratroopers like Alan Craven do it with training and drilling, so it becomes an instinctive response. For Lindy, this was pure luck. This would have helped, but not enough to get rid of all the energy from a 120-mile-an-hour fall. There must have been something else. Did she somehow find a way to get rid of that energy before it got to her? Steve Trulier is a stuntman. For him, falling is his bread and butter.
One of the most important jobs for a stuntman is to be able to fall, whether that's tripping over a curb and falling over to the ground, falling from 5 or 10 feet, or falling from 50 or 100 or 120 feet.
And those who fall for a living are well aware of the risk.
If you landed on the top of your head and you break your neck at the top, your cervical spine, then that could cripple you or kill you.
The important thing for Steve is to protect himself. Using his body to absorb the energy is not a good option.
As you get higher, then you need to fall into something. It might be an airbag or a box rig, something that's designed to absorb the energy that you create by falling from a great height.
So when you're falling from a height, what you land on really matters. In 1999, Sarah Woodruff was lucky to survive when she fell almost 1,000 feet whilst out climbing. She smashed her kneecap, fractured her spine, and had to spend almost a year in a body brace. But it wasn't the way her bones absorbed the energy of the fall that saved Sarah. It was what she landed on.
We were doing winter climbing that day. Winter climbing in Glencoe can be a mixture of sort of ice or rock or just ice.
She was climbing on one of the most treacherous mountains in Glencoe.
Bidian, or Beachin as it's pronounced, is the highest mountain in Argyll. It holds the snow very well in winter. It's got some big cliffs on all sides of it, and obviously a hazard as well.
And as the day progressed, the weather had started to turn.
It was snowing, so we had wet snow, and it snowed all the time that I was out that day.
On her way down the summit, Sarah lost her footing.
I slipped on the ice, so I was sliding down the ice on this ridge, and it wasn't too steep, so I did try to do an ice axe break, like with my ice axe, like pushing it into the summit ridge, but it was really, really icy.
The ice axe failed to grip, and within seconds she was plummeting down the face of the cliff.
I suddenly went over a steep edge, which took me down a cliff face. So then I was falling through the air. I sort of accelerated in my speed and I was tumbling.
When Sarah came to halt, she felt sure she had not fallen far.
I thought maybe it was going to be 20 feet or something, so really, really surprised. It went very, very quickly.
She'd fallen basically almost 1,000 feet, as it turned out, off the mountain.
Sarah survived, but most people who fall that far on those mountains aren't so fortunate.
I can remember one 12-month calendar period we dealt with 18 fatalities. So that gives you an idea that a lot of folk lose their lives in these mountains.
So what was it that saved Sarah's life? What an object lands on makes all the difference. And put more scientifically,
what we've got here is the three surfaces we're dropping eggs onto. The immediate thing you can see is the force on the concrete is a lot higher. The concrete absorbs no energy from the egg at all, and that's why the egg broke. It's got to get rid of the energy.
And it's the same for a person.
He or she will be stopped very, very quickly. So the force goes straight through the body, and the likelihood is the body will break. Concrete, no give. Hit it, hurts.
But for the sand and snow, it's a different story.
Sand and snow are fairly similar. They absorb the shock in different ways. The sand is granular, so it parts, and the force spreads to the sand very well. If the sand's soft and the sand is dry, it dissipates the energy better. The snow, it's got crystals in, so it breaks the crystals. The breaking the crystals takes energy, so it absorbs energy to do that. If the snow's nice and loose snow, it will spread, it will absorb some shock even by forming to your shape on the ground.
But not all snow is that absorbent. For Sarah, the appalling conditions on the day of her fall were what saved her. When she reached the bottom of the cliff, she fell into fresh snow. Had the snow been a couple of days old, it would have melted or frozen, and it would have been a very different story.
Well, there you go, Sarah. You reckon you were coming down this ridge? She fell off down around here, down in there, and landed down there. If that had been hard snow and the snow had fallen in a different way, you wouldn't have stopped there. You would have come all the way down over that crag there, and as other folk have done, landed away down here, which would have been a fatal fall. Sarah wouldn't have survived had there not been deep snow where she landed. Almost certainly the fall would have been fatal.
Now Lindy was coming in to land on a specially prepared parachute drop zone. Maybe this helped.
Elsinore is probably one of the biggest drop zones in the US, and it's pretty much on the edge of the desert.
Could it have been the sandy desert surface that saved Lindy?
She landed outside the drop area, as far as I know, on rather hard-baked, scrubby desert. It was like landing on your patio.
The ground would have done little to take the impact of Lindy's fall. For Alan and Sarah, the explanation of why they survived is straightforward. They got rid of the energy of their fall before it got to them. Alan by shattering his bones, Sarah by landing on snow. Their experiences still cannot fully explain the miracle of how Lindy survived. But there's a story from Salford that may hold the key to the mystery. One night in April 1993, a man jumped from the 22nd floor of this tower block. He landed on this Nissan Micra, got up and walked home. Unlike Alan and Sarah, the reason he survived had less to do with what he fell on than the way he was falling. He'd had a few drinks, and it seems this was important in his survival.
People fall in very different ways, and it depends how they've fallen, for instance, whether they've deliberately jumped or whether they've been pushed accidentally. Also, how they fall will depend on things like whether they've taken drugs or alcohol. If we use alcohol as an example, that's like a muscle relaxant, and they will fall in sort of a relaxed way. They probably won't think about what they're doing, and that can sometimes dissipate the energy, and they may actually have less injuries than someone who'd fallen, who has no drugs or alcohol on board, who's aware of the fall and tenses really hard.
But it seems impossible to imagine that Lindy could have been relaxed, and she certainly hadn't been drinking.
This is more of a feeling than a memory, just the feeling of panic, I suppose. Just realising that something has gone horribly wrong, that there is nothing I can do about it.
To unravel the secret of why she survived, are there any clues in what would have happened as she was falling?
I'm told that after 5 seconds I pulled my parachute as was appropriate. Nothing happened, so I went through the reserve drill.
Now the standard procedures that she would have been taught would be to initiate what we call a cutaway, which would detach you from the main canopy.
This then gives clean airspace for the reserve canopy to deploy. But for Lindy, when she cut away,
nothing happened. Nothing left her container. When the reserve left the pack, there was more space for the main canopy to move about, at which point, as the pressure was taken off, the main canopy did also start to deploy. This is probably one of the most scary situations that can occur for a skydiver, and it's one of the things you really, really just don't want to happen.
Lindy was in big trouble.
She was actually flying under part of her reserve canopy, and her main canopy was entangled around either part of the canopy or the lines of the reserve. So if you have something snagged on one side or the other, it's going to cause it to start spinning, and when the canopy starts spinning, it will start to nosedive, and from there on in, there's not a lot you can do.
Spinning around, hurtling through thin air at 120 miles an hour, she couldn't possibly have been relaxed. But as she was spinning, maybe there was something else happening to her body, something beyond her control. Steve Myers believes he has the answer.
You're spinning, as you're spinning, the blood gets forced to the feet and away from the head. No blood goes to the head, no oxygen to the brain, you pass out.
With passing out comes something else.
Your body's actually quite relaxed, so you think about something that is rigid, it doesn't absorb shock while it bounces. So maybe when you're more relaxed, you can absorb a lot more.
By losing consciousness on her descent, Lindy had unwittingly helped to save her own life. It's not only people who have a better chance of surviving if relaxed. Cats do too. Sometimes it seems cats will misjudge heights and jump from 2 stories or more. Not a good idea. But funnily enough, jump more than 5 stories and they have a better chance of surviving. 90% better, in fact. The reason being, after falling 5 stories, they begin to relax. And the reason they relax is because they've reached something called terminal velocity. And that is the point an object stops accelerating.
If an object is dropped from altitude, initially there'll be almost no air resistance. Now, as it increases in speed, so does the air resistance, the effective air resistance, the drag on the object. And what happens is eventually that force, that drag, that air resistance becomes equivalent but opposite to the weight, and it falls at constant speed. So this is your terminal velocity.
And skydivers say that for them it's 120 miles an hour. So that's the speed Lindy thinks she was falling at. Lindy is quite small, so could her weight have made a difference? The easiest way to see the effect of weight isn't in air, but in a liquid.
The fluid I've got here is simply washing up liquid. Okay? It looks very pretty, it's green, but it's just washing up liquid. And what I'm going to do is to drop 2 spherical balls into it, one of which is made of steel, the other one is made of plastic. Now these have, although they present the same surface area, they have different masses. Okay? One weighs about 2 grams, the other about 4 grams. Okay? So we're going to see what happens to these as we drop them in the fluid. Okay? First the steel, followed by the plastic. Okay, so you see that because of its much lower mass, the plastic ball falls with a much lower terminal velocity than the steel does.
Will 2 parachutists with the same canopy fall at the same speed? These are 2 identical parachute dolls. One of them is being given a straitjacket, a lead one, and so he's now just a bit heavier than the other. Throw them off the top of a building and, with the same canopy, the heavier one falls a lot faster. So weight makes a big difference to the speed a person falls at.
Okay, guys, what we're going to move on to now is the low ramp.
As an instructor for the RAF Falcons, Barry Buck understands all the factors that affect speed in freefall.
As we fall through a column of air, we're looking for the air to hit our bodies, so we fall nice and clean through the sky. Terminal velocity is about 120 miles an hour. So that's what we're looking to. That's the basics of free falling. We need to change our body position to move across the sky, or to slow down, or to increase our speed. And how we do that, we either increase the surface area, or we take stuff away to decrease our surface area.
If drag and weight make such a difference to the speed someone falls, how fast was Lindy really falling? Former parachutist Lindy Harding remembers virtually nothing about her 4,000-foot fall. But it seems uncovering the speed at which she fell may at last solve the mystery of why she survived.
I've been speculating around what happened, and I do know that I hit the floor at quite a speed, because a passerby reported it to the emergency services because he saw me coming into land at high speed.
Terminal velocity for a human is assumed to be 120 miles an hour, but Lindy wants to find out if that was her speed. She's not willing to jump out of a plane again, so instead she's travelled to a wind tunnel. By blasting her with wind, Andrew Keenor can calculate the sort of speed she might have been falling at.
To that.
She's going to take up different positions, but first is head first. The wind is switched on, and Andrew Keenor gathers the results.
Right, so how did that feel then?
Windy.
Okay, so take up your start shape position. I can run the wind up again.
Okay, very good.
The wind is switched on again. This time Lindy can really feel the wind and it's a struggle to stand up.
I'll turn the wind up. If you feel uncomfortable, just wave and I'll turn the tunnel off.
And next, Lindy takes the position that Dr. Rosemary Morton worked out she was probably in when she fell. Curled up in a ball.
Right, well, now we'll...
So is Lindy's terminal velocity 120 miles an hour?
We can show the effect of you being in different positions on the drag and what your terminal velocity would have been. The head first test, which as we might have expected, give the lowest drag, and that would have given you a terminal velocity of between 315 and 320 miles an hour. So that's going fairly fast.
Fairly fast? It's nearly 3 times faster than the average speed of a free-falling skydiver.
Now with the star position, which is the opposite, the drag is considerably higher. I mean, it's 9 times higher. And your final velocity there would have been 106, 107 miles an hour.
Yeah, you could really feel that in the wind tunnel as well.
It's beginning to emerge that how Lindy fell could have radically altered the speed of impact. So what's the speed for the ball shape Lindy was in when she fell?
In the ball position, which is the position you think you were in when you had your parachute failure, your terminal velocity is around about 140 miles an hour.
So the ball position would not have slowed Lindy down. It cannot be the explanation for her survival. But Andrew has one more calculation to make. The effect on her speed of the tangled mess of parachutes above her head.
We can assume a ball shape that has a certain drag factor associated with it. And we can make an attempt to add that onto the data we have here. So if we take a value of a ball 0.5 metre in diameter, which is probably as small as it's likely to get, that gives a terminal velocity of 75 miles an hour. And now if we maybe say the parachute ball is 1 metre in diameter, which is probably at the other extreme of what it might be, that gives you a terminal velocity of 43 miles an hour. So this probably means that you hit the ground somewhere between 40 and 70 miles an hour, I would guess, which is very fast. I wouldn't like to hit a wall at that speed.
Wow. I don't think I'm going to experiment with hitting anything at 40 miles an hour again,
No,
actually.
I wouldn't. No. Make sure you're well padded.
So Lindy's weight and the amount of drag from her ball shape and the trailing canopy had a big effect on the speed that she fell. Someone heavier and it would have been a very different story.
If somebody else had taken that pack, then the incident probably would have happened to them. Now, the outcome could have been completely different. It doesn't bear thinking about at all. Whereas it happened to me, I survived. I'm well, I'm walking, I'm talking, I have all my faculties, and I feel that I've actually come out better for the situation than if the whole thing had not occurred.
But even if Lindy fell at the slowest possible speed, she was still incredibly lucky to survive. When pedestrians are hit by a car travelling at 40 miles an hour, only 1 in 10 survive. And the metal of the cars got a bit of give. What Lindy fell on didn't. No single thing ensured her survival. She was saved by an extraordinarily lucky combination of factors. Landing on her ribcage, spreading the fall over different parts of her body, passing out, and the speed she fell.
It could be different every time you fall. You know, you shouldn't make a habit of jumping out of a building. If you survive once, I think you should say, that's it, that's my turn, that's one of my 1, 2 or 9 lives, and maybe I should leave it at that.